Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
The holidays are here at the Home Depot, so let's get to decorating. Find your perfect tree in our huge assortment of shapes, sizes, and styles. Like the easy-to-assemble Jackson Noble fir, with pre-lit branches perfect for styling with all your favorite ornaments. Or the Flock Starry Light Fraser fir, with over 1,900 pre-lit memory wire branches that keep their shape so it's ready right out of the box. Ooh. Find the perfect tree now at the Home Depot.
Hey there, Duke fans, and welcome to DBR Bites, episode number 70. It's Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I got Jason Evans with me. You're probably wondering why this intro is so short. It's because we are recording this just mere seconds after DBR Bites episode 69. It's a busy week for us. We wanted to get both of these recorded and out to you, so you might be hearing this on a Thursday or a Friday, but this was coming after the Arizona preview that we just recorded. Jason, how have you been in the last 5 seconds since you stopped recording on the last episode and started pushing the button on this episode?
Well, my life is completely different than it was 10 seconds ago.
It was, yeah. A lot has changed. A lot has changed. Jason, for this one, and this is a kind of a fun episode, we take a look at Duke and the ACC a lot. But this time we're going to focus on the ACC as a whole and discuss where they are in the first couple weeks of the season. Yes, we're only 2 weeks into the season. This is a very small sample size, and it will be for quite a while. But I think it's important to look at the ACC and figure out what they're doing because, as Jason and I have always opined on the show, and Sam when he was on the show, the ACC needs to be a strong conference, and it's very, very important for them to be there. That's why we have a number of teams in the stat category. I believe it's one of the original questions of the stats game is number of teams in the ACC to make the NCAA tournament. So it's always been important for us.
Yeah, and I want to, in full disclosure, I went ahead and I looked at the ACC and I was like, oh, you know what? There's an easy list to me of 3 teams that I feel like are doing a little better than I expected, and 3 teams that are doing a little bit worse than I expected. I went, oh, this is great. I'll do 3 surprising, 3 disappointing, and I'll let Donald do the same. I'm like, Donald, go ahead and pick out your teams as well. And we ended up picking the same teams. So maybe that sort of tells you that we were accurate about which teams are actually doing better and worse than expected so far.
Yeah, so here's what we're going to do. And I think we'll break it up into, we'll do one part and then we'll take a break and do the other part. But the first part we're going to do are the surprising teams so far in the early season. And yes, again, we're taking 2 weeks to account. There hasn't been a lot of games, but we think that there are at least 2 or 3 teams out there that we think are showing themselves to be a little bit better than expected and might be on their way to a better season than expected. Okay. Also, I will caveat, do not take anything that we have to say and hold it against us if these teams start to suck later on. That's how the business works. Okay. We're just talking about November 19th, 2024 to this point, how teams are doing. Jason, start with the 3 teams. And I want to lead you with this. There is one team that has a Duke transfer who we said, hey, this team, it's great that he's getting playing time. It's great that he might start, but he is on a team that's just not going to do well. And so far, this team has exceeded expectations, probably better than a lot of teams in this country.
Yeah, you're talking about the Stanford Cardinal, and you're talking about our man Jaylen Blakes. So I went ahead and I sorted Bart Torvik's rankings, taking out all the preseason bias. Just what have you done for me so far? If everyone started the year with no expectations whatsoever. And Stanford is the number 52 team in the land, according to Bart Torvik, in terms of the efficiency metrics. And frankly, Stanford was not expected to be a top 50 team when you looked at them in the preseason. By the way, at number 52, they are the 5th best team in the ACC. Stanford was not expected to contend for a top 4 double bye. Stanford was expected to be on the bottom half of the ACC, if not the bottom 4 or 5. So Stanford
they were picked to be 17th. So
oh wow,
there
okay.
you go. Yeah.
There you have it. I didn't know the exact number. Thank you for giving us that.
Yep. I have the list, the preseason list in front of me. They were picked to finish 17th out of 18 teams.
Yeah, that's going to be very useful as we go through this process because, again, they are currently fifth best in the ACC based on their performance so far. There is little question with Stanford that they have almost certainly the best post player in the ACC. I'm serious about that. The best post player in the ACC thus far has been Maxime Reynaud. He's averaging 21.3 points per game and 12.8 rebounds per game. Those are big numbers. 21 and 12 is big. That is very impressive. He is one of 4 guys on this Stanford team who shoot more than 4 3-pointers per game. And every one of those guys who takes a lot of 3-point shots is hitting better than 38% from 3-point range. That is wow kind of stuff. That is how you outperform expectations, is that you put in 3-point buckets again and again and again. And that's what Stanford's been doing. The shocker on this team is that after Maxime Reynaud, the guy who has the second highest usage rate on the team and who has been freakishly good at driving to the basket is none other than Jaylen Blakes. I did not think, Donald, I did not think that there was any way Jaylen Blakes would have a super high usage rate unless it was because, love you, Jaylen, unless it was because he was making a lot of turnovers, because turnovers count in usage rate. But that has not been the case with Jaylen Blakes. He has got a high usage rate because he has gotten really, really good at getting in the lane and finishing in the paint. He is 15 of 19 on 2-point shots thus far this season. That's outrageous. I don't care if you shoot.
And this is coming from, remember, the last couple of years, he had a couple of games, right, where he led the team in scoring, right? He had those that basically week and a half where he was just on fire and everyone was like, this is great. He had chances where he came off the bench and did some great things. I think he even had a dunk in somebody's face. But he missed, there was a couple of times where he came into games and because he had been so rusty, he hadn't played well, he missed a lot of bunnies. So for him to be 15 of 19 from 2, and it's not like he's taking, mid-lane jumpers. He's going to the rack, something that they like to do, and it was feast or famine for him, right? He was either making it or getting blocked. So for him to make 15 out of 19, I think is it shows how much he has improved in the offseason.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that shooting 80% from 2, even for him, is not sustainable. It's just, I don't think that's going to happen for a guard. But at the moment, Jaylen Blakes is averaging around 15 points per game and close to 5 assists per game. I think if the season ended today, and of course it's absurd, the season doesn't. If the season ended today, Jaylen Blakes would be getting votes for all ACC teams. That's how good he has been so far. Now, he still can't shoot from 3. He's just 22% on 3-pointers, but he does everything else. Everything else you would want from a point guard. He's getting better than 2 steals per game. And frankly, I'm surprised it's not even higher than that. And he's one of the major reasons that this Stanford team has been so surprising. Now, I do want to point something out about Stanford before we wrap up conversation about them. Their schedule is a joke. Their schedule is
I was going to say, they haven't played anybody yet.
Yeah.
They haven't fought nobody,
Paul. Is just, here are their 2 best non-conference games that they have. And by the way, they're not participating in the ACC SEC Challenge. Their 2 best non-conference games are games against Oregon and Grand Canyon. Those are the only top 100 teams on their schedule. But so far, they've taken care of business in a pretty big way against the lousy teams they've played. And frankly, there are teams in the ACC that don't do that every year. So Stanford is legitimately a upper middle of the pack kind of ACC team at the moment. And they are clearly one of the surprising teams in the conference.
I think the thing about Stanford that is making it where, both you and I kind of said, wow, they're actually doing pretty good. Yes, they're playing terrible teams, but they're beating them handily. It's not like they're escaping by 1 point or going to overtime or something like that. I mean, so far they've played Denver. They beat them 85-62. Cal State Fullerton, they beat them 80-53. Northern Arizona, they beat them 90-64. And UC Davis has been the closest game they've had, 79-65. I will say they do play a couple more games this week, and then next week they have that test against Grand Canyon. But I like what I see from them so far. And I think, again, a team that's toiling at the bottom of the ACC, or at least expected to be, was not expected to be coming out and handing out hammers to teams. And so far they've done that. Now, again, will they sustain that? That's the question. But also, this helps the rest of the ACC. If Stanford is expected to be at the bottom and they're coming up and playing the way they are right now, that that is the bottom of the ship. You want to lift that bottom up as much as you possibly can, so that when the ACC is compared to other schools, they can say, "Hey, that team we thought was going to be do really poorly, they're actually up here." So you want all the teams at the bottom to, exceed expectations a little bit because that helps the conference.
Yeah, let's get to the other team that you and I both identified as a team that was surprising. And this is not a team that had been expected to be at the bottom of the league. Pitt, coached by none other than Coach Capel, had been a team that many people expected to be, like top 40, top 50-ish in the country, maybe a little bit worse than that. Well, they have greatly exceeded expectations. Currently, unbiased, no preseason ranking involved. They are the number 11 team on Bart Torvik's rankings. There is no other ACC team other than Duke and Pitt who are ranked in the top 40 based on how they've played so far this year. Both UNC Miami are in the 40s, and then I mentioned Stanford and Notre Dame. We'll get to all that a little bit later, but this Pitt team is, at least so far in the season, they are showing themselves to be absolutely a top 15 kind of club. Over the weekend, they just spanked West Virginia. And West Virginia is always a pretty decent team. Pitt won that game by 24 points. And frankly, Pitt has been beating the brakes off of just about everyone. They've won every game this season of the season so far by at least 15 points. They have put 40-plus point beatdowns, 40-plus points on two of the teams on their schedule. And the efficiency gods, the folks who pay attention to these advanced metrics, they love it. They love it when you beat a team by 40-plus points. Pitt easily has one of the top backcourts in the ACC. Sixth-year guard, yes, I said sixth year because he had a redshirt season. Sixth-year guard Damian Dunn came over from Houston. He is having far and away the most efficient year of his career. He's getting better than 16 points per game. And he is playing alongside sophomore Jaylen Lowe, who I raved about all of last year. Everyone was obsessed a year ago with Bub Carrington, who's in the NBA now and playing pretty well. But I kept on saying, this guy Jaylen Lowe is also really impressing me as a freshman guard. Now Jaylen Lowe has really stepped into his own. And frankly, he looks like he may be a future NBA player as well. He's scoring better than 14 points per game. Jaylen Lowe's getting close to 5 rebounds and 5 assists per game. He is filling up the stat sheet. But the star for Pitt so far this season is forward Ishmael Leggett. I feel like that dude's been there for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Ishmael Leggett is averaging 18.5 points per game and close to 7 rebounds per game. And he plays great defense. He's one of these, he's one of these intangibles guys who's always around the ball and always making the smart kind of play that doesn't necessarily show up in the stat book. Well, this year, Ishmael Leggett's showing up in the stat book as well. If there was a vote right now, Ishmael Leggett would be a first-team All-ACC player. And frankly, at the moment, Pitt looks like probably the second, maybe the third best team in the ACC. That's just a good bit better than what folks had expected from them.
I was going to say that they were picked to finish 7th in the conference by the voters in the preseason. They are third, according to KenPom, the third best team in the conference. They're 16th in KenPom, which, again, we started out with just 2 teams in the top 20. That was Duke and UNC. Now we have 3 in Pitt. And Pitt, I think, was down in the 40s, maybe 40s or 50s to start the season. I have to double check. But they came up quite a bit with these games and with the efficiency that you mentioned. And some of these guys out here, again, it feels like, it took Capel a couple of years to get the team that he wanted to play the way that he wanted. And now he has that. And he's starting to build those blocks. Again, they have a couple of games coming up that they need to focus on. They will play LSU, they'll play Ohio State, and that's outside of the ACC, SEC challenge. But I think that this team is poised, again, as long as they can get through this non-conference slate, pretty well. They're a team that they won't have to worry about whether they'll get into the NCAA tournament, right? They're thinking about last year where they just were always on that bubble, the last month or so. They've basically said this year, we do not want to be on any bubble. This is going to be a team that's going to play hard, focused, tough-nosed basketball, and so far it's working.
Yeah, I identified that Ohio State game that's coming up on November 29th as a really big game for them. It's a true road game at Ohio State. If Pitt finds a way to get through that game, there's a very real chance that when they play Duke on January 7th, early in the ACC schedule, this Pitt team could still be undefeated. They are playing that well at the moment, and that could be a huge game when Duke and Pitt face each other very early in the season. And again, congrats to Jeff Capel, who has really built that program up nicely. It took a little bit of time, but Pitt was patient, and the patience is paying off in a very big way for them. All right, let me move to. I mentioned that I sort of saw three teams that I thought had exceeded expectations. The third of them is Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish. They are currently 53rd in Ken Pomeroy's rankings, and they started the season at number 70. So this is a team who has continually moved up in the advanced metrics over the course of their first few games. And frankly, 70 was pretty high for them because last year they were largely between like 160 and 200 in Ken Pom the entire season until very late in the year. And folks may not have noticed it, but they closed pretty strongly. Notre Dame was a far better team in March than they were in January. They were a young club, and they clearly started to come together. And I think that's one reason why Pomeroy and the other advanced metric folks sort of saw them as being significantly better than last year, although I don't think anyone saw them being as good as they've been so far this season. Over the weekend, they beat Georgetown by 21. Now, I know that Georgetown is not exactly the power that they once were, but that's still a nice win and a nice road win at that. Marcus Burton, who we got plenty of exposure to last year at Notre Dame as a freshman guard. He is still, frankly, a ball hog. Marcus Burton never saw a shot that he does not like. He takes 35% of their shots when he's on the floor. That's kind of it's unbelievable that one guy could dominate the ball that much, but that's what Marcus Burton does. He's pretty mediocre at hitting those shots, but you know what? His gravity, the way the D has to pay attention to him, the way the defense has to be worried about him, it makes things work for his opponents. For his teammates. It opens things up for his teammates. And Burton's averaging 6 assists per game. So like it's easy for me to go, he's a ball hog. He also distributes the ball. So he's averaging 17.7 points per game, 6 assists per game, and 5 rebounds per game. And he's just 5'11". Like the fact that he does that, Marcus Burton is just, he's just a kid who he gives, it's such a cliche, he gives 110%, but Marcus Burton literally gives 110% on every single play. He is absolutely fearless. But the key to Notre Dame so far this year, I think, is the three-point shooting. They're hitting better than 39% from three, which is a big number. To be close to 40% is big time for a major college team. And that's thanks to Braden Shrewsbury, the son of the coach, and Matt Aloko, who are both, ready for it, Donald? They're both above 50% on their three-pointers on the season. I mean, come on. That's some really good shooting. I don't know that Notre Dame is going to contend for an NCAA tournament bid. That may be biting off more than they can chew at this moment. But at this moment, this Notre Dame team, they look like a team that is absolutely exceeding expectations and could be a contender, at least upper middle pack in the ACC.
They have a tournament coming up, one of those multi-team event tournaments in Vegas next week, where they play Rutgers and then Houston one day after the other. That is their test there. That is where we will see if Notre Dame really is who we think they are on November 19th. And so I'm looking forward to that. Unfortunately, at the 20th, I think it's the game. I think it's like the day after the Duke Kansas game is the game against Rutgers. So won't be able to stick around for that. But I'm interested to see how they go. They were, again, picked to finish 10th in the conference. They are currently 6th in the KenPom rankings in the ACC. I think that this is a team that they're steadily getting better. Michael Shrewsbury's recruiting has been off the charts so far this upcoming year, not for this particular team, but for next year. And the future looks bright in South Bend. I don't necessarily like it. I'm not a big Notre Dame fan in general. Mainly that's because of football. But this basketball team might have something brewing here.
Yeah. By the way, the Rutgers Notre Dame game in Vegas is the same night as the Duke Kansas game.
Oh yeah, I definitely miss it then.
Yeah.
But I'll tell the Notre Dame fans where I'm going. I'll be, hey, enjoy the MGM Grand.
They're playing at the MGM Grand. I forget the name of the arena there, but they've got like a stadium kind of situation there. It's not as big as T-Mobile Arena, where Duke will be playing against Kansas. But but those games will be happening at almost the exact same time. I suspect
MGM Grand Arena seats about 14,000 or so. I've been in it.
Oh, there you go.
It's a decent sized arena for, especially for like a conference, or not conference tournament, like a multi-team event type of
Yeah.
tournament like this. You don't need a huge gym to sell out, but it's a nice size. But again, there's just so many tournaments going on in Vegas that week, and of course the Duke Kansas game at the same time. The Duke women are in a multi-team event starting the next day, so there's gonna be a lot going on there. And again, Notre Dame's job is to try and get above the fray here, and again stand out with a victory over Rutgers and or Houston. That would be a big deal for them.
Oh, it'd be if they're even competitive with Houston, it'll be a really good thing for them.
Right, absolutely. You know what? Let's take a quick break, because on the other side, we wanted to talk about the teams that so far haven't done as well as we thought they would. We'll talk about that, and also key in on a particular big deal for the ACC. Of course, we're talking about the ACC SEC Challenge, how that could affect NCAA tournament placement. We'll talk about all that on the other side.
Hey, Duke fans, spark something uncommon this holiday with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods.
The busy holiday season is here, and Uncommon Goods makes it less stressful with incredible, hand-picked gifts for everyone on your list, all in one spot. Gifts that spark joy, wonder, delight, that it's exactly what I wanted feeling. Somehow they've created a place where you can find the exact perfect gift for everyone.
Yo, Donald, speaking of perfect gifts, I got a root beer maker for my kitchen. It's something I never thought I needed. I am making handmade, homemade root beer now. I love root beer, and it's fresh whenever I want it. I think it's pretty cool, man.
Root beer floats are in Jason's future. I'm jealous. From holiday gifts to the coolest finds for kids to hits for everyone, from book lovers to diehard sports fans like all of us, Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. Not the same old selections you can find just anywhere. And with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. And to date, they have donated more than $3 million. I think that's outstanding.
Yo, Donald, that means that I'm sort of drinking root beer for charity, I guess. That's pretty nice of me. All right, folks. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/DukeBB. That's uncommongoods.com/DUKEBB, and you'll get 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary.
We are back, and we're discussing the ACC, the teams that have done well. We talked about before the break, and now we are going to talk about 3 teams that haven't done as well as we thought they were. And Jason, I'll get to you first. I want you to start with this team. This team we thought was going to be better, and somehow it just hasn't been working up in Syracuse, New York, the way we thought it would.
Yeah, definitely not. Now, Syracuse is a weird sort of story. Usually, if you're talking about a team being disappointed, you're going to talk about losses. Syracuse is undefeated. They keep on winning. And with every win, they drop further and further down the Ken Pom rankings because they're playing lousy teams and barely beating them. Let me give you some of these scores, and man, it is not a pretty picture, the opponents that Syracuse has played so far. They played Lemoyne, like one of the bottom 20 teams in college basketball. They beat them by 4. So they played Colgate, who's frankly not.
They were
that
also
much.
down to Lemoyne for most of the game.
That's right. That's true. They played Colgate. They won by 2. Now a W is a W, but Colgate, they won 74-72. And if you think things couldn't get worse than that, they then played Youngstown State. Now I want to be clear: Lemoyne, Colgate, Youngstown State, all among the bottom half of teams in college basketball. They played Youngstown State. They won by 9, but it was a game that went to 2 overtimes, double overtime. It took them to beat Youngstown State. This Syracuse team is just they're playing really, really weak teams, and they're struggling to get past them. That changes this week because They've got Texas this week. Seriously better than Lemoyne. Texas, slightly different caliber of opponent than Lemoyne. And they've got Tennessee coming up in a couple weeks. And things are going to get very real for Syracuse in those games, I think. I'm not sure if word has gotten all the way up to upstate New York, but there's this thing called the 3-point shot that matters in the modern college basketball game. Syracuse only takes 31% of their shots from long range. They're like among the bottom 40 teams in the country in terms of how many 3-pointers they're shooting. Now, in fairness, they shouldn't be blamed for not shooting a lot of threes because they are one bad 3-point shooting team. They are terrible. They only hit 25% of their threes on the season. If Duke hits 25% of our threes in a game, we spend an entire podcast talking about how bad it is. At Syracuse, that's them going like, it's not a bad day. Pretty decent. If you're wondering why the Syracuse team is struggling so bad, it's because they're just a terrible shooting team. It is worth noting one of the reasons Syracuse is so bad is because they lost their best player from last year, Judah Mintz. And I don't quite know, there's some of these guys, Donald, where you go, really? That was the decision you made? Judah Mintz decided to stay in the NBA draft, even though most folks said he probably wasn't going to be a second-round pick. It turned out he went undrafted. He is currently playing in the G League. I would guess he's making around $50,000 for the year. If he had come back to college basketball, Judah Mintz was going to be at least a $500,000 player. Whether it's entering the portal or whether it's being retained by Syracuse. I don't get why he left, but he did. And as a result, he has given way to J.J. Starling as the dominant player for Syracuse. J.J. Starling's averaging 21 points per game, which is pretty good. He's developed an outstanding mid-range pull-up jumper kind of game. But, any conversation about Syracuse has to talk about the fact that they're just not good on defense, even though J.J. Starling is carrying them on offense. They're a bad defensive team. Ken Pomeroy has them as the number 164 defensive team in the country. They're the worst defensive team in the ACC, according to the advanced metrics. And I thought that maybe Syracuse was going to begin to turn things around because, frankly, the program has been headed in the wrong direction for a while. This is a legendary program. And I like Adrian Autry, but so far he's showing that, maybe he's not the guy to carry Syracuse forward in the wake of the Jim Boeheim era, because I think the Syracuse team is in for a very, very rough ACC season.
I think the good news about Syracuse is that so far they have embraced the mantra that I love, and that is, it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning's winning, right? Dominic Toretto once said that. The bad news for Syracuse is that they are not Dominic Toretto. And that is a problem when you're trying to embrace Dominic Toretto's mantra. It's just going to run out at a certain point. So that is the 3-point shooting you mentioned. That's going to be something that's going to be an Achilles heel for them all year. J.J. Starling, you remember he started out at Notre Dame, and then when Mike Bray retired, he moved over to Syracuse. And he's been doing well, but he needs guys to be there with him and play better on a consistent basis. As you mentioned, they have Texas coming up. That is a big deal. They have Maryland next month as well. So there's a couple of games there that are tricky games for them. And if they are not careful, they could look back. And again, we've been talking about Syracuse being on the bubble for the grand part of about 12 years, right?
Yeah.
They're barely on the bubble. They get in as a 12 seed or something like that, or they get in the play-in game. They need to be a team that, again, the name, the reputation, that team, they feel like they're a top 5 program. They better start playing like it, because they should not be winning by 2 and to Lemoyne or to, Colgate, whoever. They need to be blowing those teams out and focusing on the tougher teams that they will have on their schedule. They want to be prepared when they get to the ACC season. Right now, they are prepared. They're prepared to fail because right now they're not playing the way they should be.
All right, so the next team I have that's disappointing is going to be a little bit surprising, because they are actually a team that is one of the best wins by anyone in the ACC so far this season, and that is Wake Forest. Now, I want to stress, I still think Wake Forest has a great chance to be top 4 in the ACC and to earn the double bye, but they haven't really looked the part so far. They started the year as Ken Pomeroy's number 44 team, and right now they're number 78. So even though they've mostly won their games, they've been playing way too close for comfort games against teams like NC and USC Upstate. They trailed USC Upstate by 6 with 8 minutes left in that contest. And they also have a loss on their record, which is a pretty thorough 15-point defeat to Xavier over the weekend. Now, it was played at Xavier, and Xavier's a good team. There's no it's not like that's a disqualifying kind of thing. But if you're Wake Forest, you hoped that you would be better than 15 points closer to Xavier. Their backcourt. Tell me if you've heard this before, Donald. They're not shooting very well from the perimeter. Hunter Salas, Cam Hildreth, and Parker Friedrichsen is their backcourt and wings. I ran the numbers, Donald. Those guys are combined 9 of 52 from 3 on the season. I'm going to repeat that. Their starting guards are 9 of 52 on 3-pointers. I mean, wow. That is really, really bad. Hunter Salas is shooting just 21% from 3, and he's been the best of those guys on 3-point shots. Ouch. Now, the interesting thing about Salas that I wanted to mention is, so last year, folks will remember, I mean, Hunter Salas was great against Duke in the 2 games we played against them. Last year, he hit better than 40% from 3, and I think everyone was like, oh, he's a good 3-point shooter. It's possible that maybe last year was an aberration, because his first 2 years when he was at Gonzaga, he was just a 25% 3-point shooter. And now this year he's at just 21%. So maybe that 40% was a little bit of a mirage. I don't know. I mean, he hit 5 out of 6 against Duke when we lost them at Wake. So I'm more than happy for Hunter Salas to never hit a 3-pointer against Duke ever again. As I mentioned, their results haven't been that good, but they do have one very good win. They beat a pretty good Michigan team 72-70, but I still feel like this Wake club is underachieving so far. And as I mentioned, they've been doing nothing but going down for the most part in the advanced metrics. And we haven't gotten the first of the NCAA's net rankings, but I think when the first rankings come out, unless Wake starts to turn things around, they will not be in a good spot to earn an at-large bid.
Yeah, I am not as disappointed in Wake as you are, only because beating Michigan is a big deal, and I think they have a couple of chances.
By the way, it's worth noting, yeah. I had very high hopes for Wake. Like,
yeah.
in the preseason, we talked a little bit in the preseason. I sort of thought there was a very good case that Wake was the 3rd best team in the ACC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, they are going to have chances to improve the way they should. Now, I will say this: there's one team that we had differing opinions on, and or I'm sorry, 2 sets of teams that we had different opinion on. So the team that I thought has been disappointing, is kind of a weird reason, is Louisville. And Louisville, as you mentioned, despite the fact that they have changed literally everybody on their roster, they have a new coaching staff in place. You and I have said that Louisville is poised for big things. Now, I will say this: they've only played 2 games. That is my first red flag about Louisville. They literally took a bye week the 2nd week of the season. I don't know why they did that, because I think, especially with a team that doesn't have the continuity that this team has, right? Everyone's coming in from elsewhere. You would want to have another game, at least one game over there, to kind of continue to gel this team. Now, they have 2 games, as I mentioned on the record. They're 1-1. They beat Morehead State 93-45, but the one game that they played against a good team, Tennessee, and Tennessee is a very good team, they got blown out by 22. So that is now they're going against Bellarmine, Winthrop. They have a game against Indiana. Then they have the first game of the ACC slate. After the ACC SEC schedule, they have that first game is against us, against Duke, and so that's going to be a big test for them. But they have to get back on track and show that this team is, again, one of the teams that people thought was going to be one of the top teams in the ACC, and poised to kind of have this regeneration. Again, Louisville, a big brand. They want to return to the status that they were in the 2010s as one of the teams to beat in the nation, not just the ACC. To do that, they got to play better when they go up against better teams.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that they took that big break, and I don't know what's behind it. A 10-day break in early November. It may just be, that Pat Kelsey decided, because he has an entirely brand new roster, that he was like, I want more time to have these guys gel before we play, really big games. I mean, they did play that. They had that game against Tennessee, but in the next couple of weeks they're going to have Indiana, they're going to have Mississippi in the ACC SEC challenge, and then their ACC season starts with their game against Duke on December 8th. So, and by the way, they've got a big game against Kentucky coming up in mid-December. So they're going to have tough opponents. They're going to have big games. As the season moves on, they just chose not to play a lot of early ones. All right, so the last team that we have that I wanted to mention as being disappointing is Georgia Tech. I had high hopes for Damon Stoudemire's sophomore season as coach at Georgia Tech, but they've already picked up losses to North Florida and Georgia. Now, it's worth noting, I mean, Georgia's a rival, and I get that those games, anything can kind of happen. And Georgia's a power conference team. They're just not a very good power conference team. And if Georgia Tech was, on their way to a good season, you would think they would be able to handle a team like Georgia. Georgia Tech started the year well inside Ken Pomeroy's top 100, but thanks to those two losses, they're outside the top 100 right now. So a game against Georgia Tech is really a pretty meaningless game in terms of advanced metrics. And I would love for them to play their way back into being, like top 70 or so, which is where a lot of people thought they would be at the start of this season. It's worth noting that game they lost to North Florida. They gave up over 100 points. I don't understand how an ACC team gives up more than 100 points to North Florida. No offense to North Florida, but North Florida lost to UNC Asheville by 14 points. This is not like they're one of the best mid-majors out there. I don't get what's going on at Georgia Tech. I feel like I've seen this, by the way, from Georgia Tech in the past. Like every year that Georgia Tech has a mediocre season, you look back early in the year and you're like, they weirdly lost a game to Stetson or North Florida or someone like, how'd that happen? And then you look at their game against Georgia and they lose their game to Georgia because they play Georgia like every year. And over the past 10 years, Georgia is 8-2 against Georgia Tech. And Georgia's just not that. Their basketball program is nowhere near their football program. Let's just put it that way. Georgia's not a basketball power, even though they're in the SEC. And Georgia Tech just can't seem to beat them year after year after year. I pay attention to Georgia Tech more than I do to most other ACC teams because they're right here in my hometown. And anytime Duke plays, like this year, I'll be going to the game. So I get to see more of Georgia Tech than I do most other teams in the ACC. And I don't know, every year I take a little bit of hopium or something like that. I don't know. But I always think, I'm like, oh, this year's Tech team looks like they may be decent. And then they disappoint me year after year after year. So easy choice for me. If I'm looking for disappointing ACC teams, it's almost always Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech's the only team in the ACC that has 2 losses on the season, and you mentioned one of them being to North Florida, the other being to Georgia. I think maybe it's a mental block when it comes to Georgia, right? Like, because beating Georgia is, again, not only beating your rival, but as I transition out of the disappointing into what kind of the overarching theme here for the ACC is the ACC needs to play better and beat teams from other Power 5 conferences. And to do that, that is how you up the reputation, right? Back in the day when it was 9 teams or even 12 teams, the ACC would pummel everybody, right? And people go, the ACC is the best conference because not only are they beating each other up, they're beating everybody else up, and nobody stands a chance against them. Now so if you look at the Ken Pom rankings, he ranks the conferences. The SEC is number 1. The SEC, we've talked about the SEC being pretty decent, but we've talked about the cream of the crop being the Big 12 and the Big 10, right? The Big 12 is second, the Big 10's third, the Big East is fourth, and then there's the ACC. So when you look at the games that are coming up for the ACC against those opponents from those conferences, those are the key here. There are 38 top 100 Ken Pom opponents for ACC teams in the next month. And that's not counting Duke going to Illinois or Duke playing Illinois at the Garden in February. I'm just talking about the non-conference slate season here, November and December. And that's not counting the ACC SEC challenge, which I think is going to be huge because, Jason, did you know this? If you looked at the Ken Pom rankings today and you look at the matchups for the ACC SEC challenge and you say the higher rated Ken Pom team is going to be favored over the lower rated Ken Pom team, if you just said that, the ACC would be favored in 2 games. Notre Dame has a higher ranking than Georgia. They are 52 to Georgia 67. And then Pitt is 16th, and they are going up against 28th ranked Mississippi State in the ACC SEC Challenge. The lowest ranked team in the SEC is Vanderbilt. They are 87. So this is a huge, huge opportunity for the ACC if they can win that challenge. Last year, I believe it was a draw, right? It was 7-7, I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Or I think it was 7-7. So great. Like we held our own. But no one gives you points for holding your own in this type of situation. If you can win the ACC SEC challenge, that means that in at least 6 of those wins, assuming let's say Pitt wins that game and Notre Dame wins that game, you have 6 games where a underdog is going to win. And you need those kind of games, not just for the individual teams, you need it for the conference as well. Because when they look back, when they're in that room in wherever, Indianapolis or Dallas, wherever they have the selection committee housed up, that group is going to look at, yes, they're going to look at particular teams and their qualities and who they beat, but they're going to say, oh, this team went 8-8, or I'm sorry, they went 10-10 in the ACC. The ACC compared to the Big East. What are we talking about? The ACC compared to the SEC. What are we talking about? Oh, the ACC beat the SEC in this challenge. So clearly they have teams that can contend with some of the better teams that we think are in this field. That is how teams get off the bubble and get into the dance. Come on the other side, if we do not have a good showing in the non-conference, that is how bubble teams see their bubble burst, and they are on the outside looking in. And we obviously don't want that to happen for the ACC. So this next couple of weeks is going to be pretty important leading up to the ACC SEC challenge, but especially that challenge, getting out and getting some quality wins. If the team, like you mentioned, there's some teams that just don't have that many, right? They don't have that many opportunities to show that they are better than people think they are. When you get that opportunity, the ACC better take advantage of it.
Yeah, in the preseason, when Ken Pomeroy put out his preseason expectations, there were only 2 ACC teams who were not ranked in the top 100. And we talked a little bit about, how many ACC teams it seemed like they were in the top 60, top 70, and that, it looks like maybe the conference had a chance to bounce back. There are currently 5 ACC teams who are outside of the top 100. More ACC teams are moving down than are moving up in the rankings. And, you mentioned that we are 5th in the conference rankings behind the other 4 power conferences. There's a bit of a gap developing between like Duke and the number 4 conference, the Big East. It's unfortunate, and the conference is just not going to give itself a lot of chances to be impressive during conference season. If you don't play well in the non-conference season, then there are just fewer chances for you to show off during the conference season, because there just aren't good teams you can beat. I mean, what ends up happening is that everyone is going to circle Duke, UNC, and I don't know, Pitt on their schedule and say that's the team we have to beat, because frankly, beating anyone else in the ACC just doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think part of it, right, is like you said, some of these teams just aren't playing anybody, right? Florida State does not have a top 100 KenPom team outside of the ACC SEC challenge. Big Boston College, the same thing. And yes, Boston College is picked to be the worst team in the conference. But again, you want that bottom shelf to lift up above, like you said, into the top 100, because if you get the more teams in the top 100, that helps the rating of the conference in general. That again helps the conversation in the room. And when they say, oh, they beat, this ACC team beat this team, they go, oh, the ACC is a really good conference. This makes a lot of more sense. And then you get those teams that are 10-10 or even 9-11 in conference. They have a better shot of getting into the dance because of the fact that they were in a tougher conference than people expected. This is the whole deal. But they don't measure it by us playing Wake Forest and Wake Forest playing Syracuse. They measure it by Wake playing Florida. They measure it by NC State playing Purdue and Kansas. They measure it by Louisville playing Kentucky. They measure it by UVA playing Tennessee. Those are games that we as a conference need to look at and say, hey, we need to do well in those games. Are we going to win them all? No. Are we going to get blown out in some? Maybe, but obviously the idea is to win as many of those as possible. The one thing I go back to was a couple years ago when the ACC, during the whole year, they were saying, oh, the ACC is only going to get 2 or 3 teams in, because that was how bad the conference looked. And then they looked back in the room and it ended up being 6 teams getting in. Why? Because the ACC had a winning record against the other Power 5 conferences. That is how you get that swish in the room. That's how, again, bubble teams have their name called on Selection Sunday. It starts with, you may think that Stanford against Oregon is not a big deal, but it could be in March. And so that's what these teams need to figure out, not just for themselves, but for the whole of the conference. Last word, Jason.
Yeah. So you mentioned, can you get teams in that go 9-11 or 10-10? Last year, the ACC had 2 teams that went 11-9 and one that went 12-8. 12-8 and did not make the NCAA tournament. Last year it was Pittsburgh. I don't think Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh would be better than 12-8 this year. We've already talked about them.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is the ACC's played its way into a situation where to get a bid, you're going to have to win a lot of ACC games because, frankly, most of the conference is not taking care of it in the non-conference season, and that's just a big problem.
And you remember one of the teams that got in was NC State, who was a bid stealer.
Right.
By going through the ACC tournament and winning it, and they stole a bid from someone else. Yeah, sure, that's fun to steal a bid from someone, but you want to look back and go, yes, that team won the ACC tournament. They were probably getting in anyway. You want that. You'd rather have the ACC be talked about as, hey, several, 6 to 7 solid teams that were already in, as opposed to one of them being a quote bid stealer from another conference. And of course, they throw in the Big 12 or the Big 10 in that equation. So we'll leave it there. Jason, great idea to come up with this because we can look back at this later on and see how right we were. If you think we were wrong on this, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. You can send us those complaints over there. Suggestion cards will be read by the staff at a later date. But for now, for Jason Evans, I am Donald Wine. This has been DBR Bites, episode number 70. And now it is time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.